Today I want to talk about light and dark. I was thinking of this. I came across a phrase and I was asking my teacher about it, and he had a lot to say. Sometimes he does that. And it just really made me think a lot about light and dark. And as well, we've been talking about liminal space recently. So I wanted to bring those together. There's a phrase from the Sandokai, the harmony of difference and equality, which is a verse that we chant every day in the Soto Zen tradition, that says, in the light there is darkness, but don't see it as darkness. In the dark there is light, but don't see it as light. Light and dark are the front and back foot in walking. Light and dark oppose one another, like the front and back foot in walking. I really love this phrase. It's one of those that, more than the literal meaning, it just really has always jumped out at me and sort of spoken to me. In the light, there is darkness, but don't see it as darkness. In the dark, there is light, but don't see it as light. Light and dark oppose one another, like the front and back foot in walking. So this week I've been thinking a lot about the front and back foot in walking, and sort of the little space between front and back foot as we walk. Does that exist? Is there a space between front foot and back foot? Is there a space between in-breath and out-breath? Is there a space between light and dark, between day and night? In the Sandokai, the word mitsuni, or intimately, we translate that as intimately, but it means like between the two is used. It's this space, this intimate space between the two, which really means not a gap. And nevertheless, there's this space between the two. What is this space between? Maybe it's the space between knowing and complete ignorance. So what does that look like? What is that space? I'll say, well, maybe I won't say yet, because I'd like to start us with a poem. When we started talking about liminal space, we're talking about sadness and how to sort of understand this feeling of, not exactly sadness, but more like a melancholy or a longing that pulls us in our practice. And it quickly led us into liminal space, the spaces that we share in between, and how precious that space is and how much it has to show us. You know, just like in the time as day becomes night, and I've spoken about this a few times, if we're especially in the woods, I personally notice this a lot in the woods. If you're in the woods, in the space between nighttime and morning, or between daytime and evening, nighttime, things become really blurred. It's almost, you have to really open up your peripheral vision to be able to see. You know, they say when you're driving on the roads, this is the most dangerous time to drive because our eyes sort of play tricks on us. And I think that's what happens when we're really looking outward for an answer. However, when we open up our peripheral vision, when we open up our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our tongue, every bit of our senses, our sense perceptions, then we can understand a lot. not so much by a direct looking out, but a very intimate perception, perceiving. So this is the thing that's been really coming up for me a lot in the last few weeks that I wanted to talk about. I said I'd start with a poem, but instead I'm going to start with a passage from a book that I've been reading. This book is called Sacred Nature, and it's by Karen Armstrong, who's a British religion scholar, and practitioner. I'm sorry about my pronunciation for the name of this name. So the great Muslim mystic Muhyiddin al-Din ibn al-Arabi, who lived between 1165 and 1240, based his theology on an ancient tradition in Islam, which is said to have recorded the words of God. I was a hidden treasure, and I desired to be known. Accordingly, I created the creatures, and thereby made myself known to them. And they did come to know me. Because the Absolute, that was the quotation, because the Absolute was mysteriously hidden even from itself. So this is what Karen Armstrong has to say about it. Because the Absolute, remember last week we talked about the Absolute as all-encompassing, or Kono talked about it all-encompassing, with absolutely nothing left out in the entire universe. Because the Absolute was mysteriously hidden even from itself. Ibn al-Arabi explained, it experienced a yearning to know itself and to become known, which impelled it to step out of the abysmal darkness of non-being and become manifest. This, it's called a holy emanation. This holy emanation began in indescribable pain, an inchoate wrench that stirred deeply within the Absolute. It emitted a sigh of sorrow and compassion for all the incipient beings coming into existence, which Ibn al-Arabi described in a forceful image, which is this. When we hold our breath for a considerable length of time, it becomes unbearably painful and can erupt in an explosive exhalation or a sob. Sorrow, therefore, is not confined to humankind. It lies in the depths of the divine and is the foundation for all things.
Can you repeat the last line, please?
Yes. Sorrow, therefore, is not confined to humankind. It lies in the depths of the divine and is the foundation of all things. Does this sound familiar, Buddhists? At the depth of all things, the depth of all things is our understanding that we suffer. This is the first noble truth, that suffering is. If there's someone here who still disputes that, I would like to talk with you some more. I think we know that suffering is. We know that we suffer. And often that's what really brings us to practice, is our suffering. You know, people often ask, what brought you to practice? Why are you in practice? What is it, you know? And the easiest answer is dukkha, suffering. You know, underneath all the stories, all the stuff, all the things that we tell ourselves is simply that sorrow, that deep, unknowable sorrow. And it's that sorrow answering itself that moves our practice forward. So this is where I started quite a number of weeks ago on talking about the great sadness that is compassion, this great, big, sad. And then we talked about the spaces in between, how this great sadness offers us deep connection, and how beautiful that is. For those of you who have had the precious opportunity to be with a person at the end of their life, you may have experienced this. There's a very deep sadness, this sadness of letting go, of really understanding the impermanence of life. You know, as we experience it with another person, of course, we're thinking about it for ourselves as well. And there's also a beautiful tenderness where we can say what's really on our heart, what's really real, what's really here, if we can do it. It's the showing up for it, the being present. That's the hard part. You know, when we feel this intense connection, we have often a strong longing for that, at the same time that we have a strong fear of it. So the only way to really be in it is to be in it. I thought of it a lot as my dad was dying last year. It was so painful and so beautiful. And the only way to be in it was to be in it, to sit with him, to listen, to talk, to offer tiny, tiny, tiny little taste of peach ice cream, and to see, does he have anything to say? Do I have anything to say? Is there anything that needs to be said? Maybe there's not. So in the spaces in between, words can really get in the way. You know, words get in the way everywhere, you know, and especially in these spaces in between, words get in the way. Our words create these, this noise, this story, these opinions that can block us from really seeing clearly or being in what we're in. And when it's painful to be where we are, when we're really experiencing that heart loneliness, sometimes we want to throw everything possible up into the in-between space, in between. Sometimes we talk a lot. You know, we want to talk over it or just say a lot of things. So if we come back to that example of the person who's leaving this human life, some people respond by just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, or planning and planning and planning and planning and planning. But we do that in all situations, really. Perhaps a little more when we're really coming up against ourselves in the pain of the world. And we do this in our heads as well. Talking and talking and talking and talking. Sometimes we're not even quite conscious of how much we plan and talk and chatter and think. It just happens as a habit that we've developed over time. And it really, this incessant chatter makes it very difficult to progress in our practice. It comes up as questions and opinions and plans and that unanswerable question, why? I think sometimes I think this is the most useless question in the universe. Why? Why do we chant? Why do we eat? Why do we, why do we use that particular chant? Why do you wear those clothes? Why did you choose that stick? Why do you have a small bell? And who cares? This is what we have to work with today. The whys are extra. The whys take us out, away from our essence. What if we just are with what is? Dropping our ideas and our opinions and our questions and our plans. And simply be in the space between front and back foot, walking between light and dark, between night and day, between life and death. Of course, we're not really between. And yet we are. When we drop the whys and the questions and the opinions, it can be a scary place to walk through. The truth is, this is always here. It's not something that we're inventing. It's just we've put up so much noise that we never really noticed it before. So then when the noise starts to die down, then we're like, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm not so sure about this. Think again about that time in sitting with somebody who's sick or dying. And we're just talking and talking and talking and talking. Or maybe it's the doctors talking and talking and talking. Or maybe it's the patient who's talking and talking and talking. And then the silence comes. What are we going to say now? As long as the doctor is telling you stuff, facts and details and statistics and medicines, everything is going out. And there's no space for receiving. Or maybe it's the family member talking, just chattering and chattering and chattering and chattering. Maybe it's, chatter sounds a little bit too simple. The chatter can mean stuff and maybe important things to say. And so does the silence. That constant chatter keeps us pushing out, pushing out, pushing out, pushing out. We see this in our breathing as well. As we practice Zazen and we focus on our breath, letting our breath settle into our lower belly. And when thoughts come up, we notice them, let them go, return to our breath. We get focused on doing. Okay, I need to follow my breath or count my breath. Okay, I'm doing it, I'm doing it, I'm doing it, I'm doing it. All thoughts, look at all those thoughts. Okay, I'm letting them go, I'm letting them go. I'm coming back to the breath. And we get, again, out, 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 out. What about the backwards step, the back foot and walking? We need it also for balance. We can't walk if we're constantly putting one foot forward, one foot forward. That's like a weird hopping, like it's out and we're going to fall down or something. So in our practice, in our life, if we can let go the incessant chatter on purpose, letting go of the chatter, even on a very, very subtle level, even when we think we're really settled and our mind is clear, if you really listen, you'll probably still notice a really tiny, quiet chatter, still judging, evaluating, critiquing, fixing. Let go of it. Let go of even that. Every level. It takes concentration to do this. It doesn't just happen magically. We don't just sit down and do our Zazen isn't just putting your butt on the cushion. Zazen requires an intention. And sure, it also requires putting our butt on the cushion and sitting in the posture. And it requires an intention, this concentration practice that we do. And when we do this, we learn to incorporate the backwards step. To step backwards, to take the out breath, to stop pushing and pushing and pushing, and take the out breath and rest in the space in between. Is that even possible? What is the space in between? Sometimes I ask people to find the very bottom of your breath on your out breath. Just let it go, let it go, let it go. And then right before the in breath comes in, there's a tiny, tiny, tiny little gap. Can you find it? If you can find this tiny little gap and rest in it, the in breath will come all by itself. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to do it. We don't have to exert that out energy. It comes in kind of from the back, all by itself. And it's the same with silence. When we can inhabit that silence, where we're not talking and fixing and doing and having opinions and planning, the truth sneaks up behind us. It's always here. We just don't, usually make enough space for it. And we make that space and also, develop the concentration needed to make the space. Because again, our thoughts don't just go away by themselves. We have to develop focus. We have to learn how to concentrate. And when we do that, we find a moment where we take the backward step and find a certain kind of ease. This is the space in between. This is true intimacy. This is the space where our intention to transform our ordinary mind into Buddha mind merges with Buddha mind. Between the two is intimacy, with no gap whatsoever. Our intention merges with the truth, the absolute truth. We experience simultaneously stillness and insight. We return to the root, to our Buddha nature, our essence, and can rest there. Many people think that Zen practice is a concept or an idea. And even though we say we don't think that, we still end up thinking that. I want to say very strongly today that Zen is not a concept. It's not something that exists in our thinking mind. Our practice exists in the spaces in between. Kono Sho talked about this last week, about this perfect Venn diagram of the absolute and the relative, exactly overlapping the details of life and ultimate truth simultaneously here, right now. Not one nor the other, not this one is better than that one. Because sometimes we get into that trap as well, you know. We're fine letting go of the material things, but are we fine letting go of the absolute? Are we fine letting go of emptiness as well? Sometimes we get into that trap of making Zen into a concept, something we think about and analyze and pick apart and question. What if we take all of that energy that we've generated by our questions, by our thinking, by our analysis, by our practice, and take the out breath, take the backward step, and see what emerges. I have the poem still. No, first I want to say one more thing. When I was fairly new to my practice, a teacher told me to practice in the same way that I might sit in the forest. And I found this a helpful thing because I love the forest. I spent my childhood in the forest. My house was surrounded by the forest, and the quieter you can be in the forest, the more you can experience. To the extent that you're not actually separate from the forest, you're merged with the forest, which is true all the time, right? But our noise gets in the way. So when we are in the forest, if we can sit quietly, making absolutely no noise, and even letting go of our body. How do we do that? You know, how many of you have spent time in the forest? If you've been in there and you've spent time around animals, you kind of know how. There's a kind of a knack that you develop of making yourself blend, making yourself invisible. You can even cultivate the ability to do it on purpose, at least in the forest. I like to picture myself the same color as the leaves and kind of transparent with the leaves. At this time of year especially, we have all the leaves. I mean, that's not the end, but that's a way to cultivate the ability to do it. And when you've really merged completely into your environment, as I started saying today, your senses open. And you're so merged with the forest that the animals come out. We can practice like this. Being so completely still, so completely still, that the ultimate truth has space to shine, to teach us, to come out from behind the clouds of our incessant chatter. This is a poem I picked for today by Mary Oliver. It's called Stars. Here in my head, language keeps making its tiny noises. How can I hope to be friends with the hard white stars whose flaring and hissing are not speech, but a pure radiance? How can I hope to be friends with the yawning spaces between them where nothing ever is spoken? Tonight, at the edge of the field, I stood up very still and looked up and tried to be empty of words. What joy was it that almost found me? What amiable peace. Then it was over. The wind roused up in the oak trees behind me, and I fell back easily. Earth has 100,000 pure contraltos. Even the distant night bird, as it talks threat, as it talks love over the cold black fields. Once, deep in the woods, I found the skull of a bear, and it was utterly silent. And once a river otter in a steel trap, and it too was utterly silent. What can we do but keep breathing in and out, modest and willing, and in our places? Listen, listen, I'm forever saying. Listen to the river, to the hawk, to the hoof, to the mockingbird, to the jack in the pulpit. Then I come up with a few words, like a gift, even as now. Even as the darkness has remained the pure, deep darkness. Even as the stars have twirled a little while I stood here, looking up, one hot sentence after another. Thank you.